Hello, welcome to the second episode of my stash busting. If you're here for the first time, greetings. If you're here for the second time, hooray, there's a second video. Now, if you're here for the first time, I highly recommend checking out my first episode of this series. It is up on my channel. It goes more into depth about why I wanted to start stash busting and some of my goals and some of the projects, the bigger projects that I'm currently working on. Now in front of me, I do have my bullet journal. At this point, episode 1.5 of this series should be up as well. And that episode goes more into detail about how I'm using my journal to help me along in this process of stash busting. So if you're interested in bullet journaling and crocheting and yarn and whatnot, I can recommend checking out that video as well. So what we're going to start with, of all the projects that I did this month, are the keychains. Now keychains I find as a very relaxing thing to make because they're usually very small, very cute, and they can be quite easy depending on what pattern you make. You can also easily take any larger size amamaguri pattern and just use a thinner yarn or a smaller hook to size it down so that you can make a more manageable keychain out of them. The one I made the most, to the extent I have now memorized the pattern in my head, are these whales. The pattern of these whales were made by Stitch by Faye. Specifically, this is the no-sew whale pattern. I love a no-sew pattern because there's just something about assembling a doll after you have crocheted everything that I just don't like. So whenever I can find a pattern that's no sew or very low sew, like if it's just finishing it off and putting it back in, I tend to make them a lot. So this is a very beginner friendly pattern. I highly recommend it if you want to learn amamaguri or just try a new type of pattern. I've actually made more of these. Some of them I've given away. Some of them are still in progress here. I was trying to finish it before I recorded this video, but I couldn't. So I won't be counting these ones specifically in my stash just because there's still parts of it that need to be finished, but I will be counting all of these. Now, another fantastic beginner friendly pattern is this no sew jellyfish, also by Stitch by Faye. That's beginner friendly in my opinion because you do have to do a bit more sewing and you have to be more conscious about crocheting in the front loop or the back loop, which is a technique you should definitely know if you want to create more complex amamaguri down the line. If you're interested in those very simple no sew patterns, check out these two. I will say all of the patterns I mentioned like before, please check out the description if you want to make any of these for yourself. Now the next two I'm going to talk about are made from patterns I found from Instagram. Instagram has become a larger place to find patterns over the years, so if you want an alternate place to find patterns both free and paid, I highly recommend checking that out. So this one is the Pocket Seal by Vanilla Gurumi, and this one is the Kitten Keychain by InkyCap.Crochet. This one I made without the eyes because I wanted to see how much the catness came out without the eyes, which I think it did pretty well, so I'm going to probably give this to a friend of mine. I could have sewn this tail a bit looser. The original pattern, you can either sew it directly to the body or you can separate the tail by using a little ring so that way it can swing a bit more freely. I should have sewn this a bit looser so that way it could wiggle a bit more, but it still works pretty well and I think it's still pretty cute. The seal is not no sewing, so just be forewarned, but the way they did the tail and nose, I think just overall is very cute and it's very squishy. That's one thing I do like is when my amamaguris are very squishy like this. Now the next amamaguri I made is this pattern called Yuki Usagi by Cute Stuff by Lumi. This is a paid pattern. I don't know if this pattern is still available because the website I originally bought it from no longer exists, but if I can find the pattern from the original designer, I will link it below. Now this is a part of a kind of pattern bundle. This is a older version of the other rabbit that's also included in that bundle. If you really like making bunnies, I highly recommend taking a look at this bundle if I can find it. Now I will say Yuki Usagi basically translates to snow bunny, which is a thing they do in Japan in the winter, which is a really cool tradition that you should check out too. Before we move on to the bigger projects, I will say that I did actually have to add yarn to the stash because there were some other projects, specifically amamaguri projects that had started, that after reevaluating my stash, I was just like, I'm no longer interested in making this. So I unraveled all that, which led to adding approximately 289 grams of yarn back into the stash. However, the next projects I'm going to talk about did use quite a bit of that yarn. So hopefully I've used at least the same amount of yarn that I had to add for this month. So the first one of these bigger projects I'm going to talk about is this panda. This panda is by Jess Huff. I really like this pattern because it didn't require a lot of sewing. The only parts I actually had to sew were the eye patches and the nose and the neck. The rest of this was cleverly designed, so you would crochet the ears, the arm, the feet first, and the tail. Then as you were making the body or the head, you would crochet in all those elements, so you didn't have to sew a lot overall. I really like a lot of her patterns. She does a lot of dolls in this style, so if you're interested in animal dolls in this style, I highly recommend checking out her website. So this project used approximately 120 grams of yarn. Specifically, this was made using 24/7 Lion brand cotton. It's a type of mercerized cotton, so it's a bit shiny on the side, but it's one of my favorite yarns to use while making amamaguri. Next is this elephant. Now this is a pattern I've been wanting to make for forever. This is one of the earliest amamaguri patterns that I saw online when I first started making all these soft toys. Now I never actually made this pattern because it has a special type of technique to create this seamless look that I wasn't confident back then to actually do. I decided this time around, why not just go for it? This pattern is originally by a Japanese artist named Chisachi Kushima, but there is an English translation of this pattern by All About Amy, which does provide really good detailed notes about the unique constructions of the legs. Unlike other patterns where you might crochet the legs separately, this one has a special chain technique to add the legs without having to sew them on. So if you're interested in learning about unique shaping techniques, I highly recommend checking out this pattern. And this particular pattern did use a lot of the gray yarn that I unraveled from the other projects. So this one specifically used 67 grams again of 24/7 Lion brand crochet yarn. Next is a project I've talked about before in my previous video, which is this Eeyore by Fuzzy Poppy. This in particular was actually made by crochet thread yarn, like all of the keychain. So I don't have an exact count of how much yarn was used for this particular project. The total of yarn used for this project will be counted in the final total of the crochet threads used. So check it out in the description again if you want to make it yourself. The final thing I'm going to talk about are these crochet pumpkins. These are made using the pattern by Katie Gets Creative. She actually provides 3 different variations of pumpkins that you can make. I only made 2 in this case. This one uses primarily single crochet, and this one primarily uses half double crochet. The other version was primarily using slip stitch, which was a bit difficult using this yarn, so I focused on the 2 other styles instead. The yarn used for this was a bunch of yarn I had gotten from unraveling an old scarf, and it was very nice and textured. It may be an acrylic wool brand, I don't know exactly. I used it because I thought it would create a slightly more modern looking pumpkin. It is a chunky weight yarn, which affected the size of this. Again, this is a pattern that you can size up or size down just by changing the crochet hook or just changing the yarn. So always experiment. So on top for the stems, I used a discontinued yarn, which is called Patton's Brilliant. I still have a little bit of it left. I only used about 4 grams in total to make these pumpkins. However, I did use all of this chunky weight yarn for the body of the pumpkins for this project. So in total, this project used up approximately 143 grams of yarn. This is actually a present for my mother, so after this video, she'll be able to now use this for her decor for fall. Next, I'm going to talk about this tiny Totoro, or Chibi Totoro as I like to call it. The original pattern is called Tiny White Totoro, and it was by Demi Wool on Instagram. This was made using crochet threads, so that total will be included with the rest of the crochet thread projects. Very cute, very simple. This one has minimal sewing, so the only thing you had to sew on was the tail. You might have seen it in my 1.5 video, but I like Totoro, so I'm going to make a lot of Totoro stuff. So now that we have gone over all the projects I completed this month, now it's time to do all the totals. So the pumpkin used up approximately 144 grams. The elephant used up 67 grams. All of the cotton thread in total, that's the Totoro, that's all the keychains, that's the Eeyore, used up approximately 46 grams. And the panda used, as I said previously, 120 grams. Now I did add 289 grams, and the original total was 2,651 grams. So let me just calculate this up right here. So I did say I was doing this in 100 gram yarn skeins essentially, but I am still calculating, because 100 is a bit on the large side, I am still calculating based on the total gram amount. If we're going by yarn skeins, I still have 265 skeins remaining. With the yarn I had to add, that's 289, so it comes out to 26,870 grams, which is 286 skeins. So the total yarn used was 377 grams for this month. So if I minus that from the total, so after minusing the amount actually used for this month, I am left with 26,493 grams used. So if I convert that into skeins, that becomes 26, I'll round up a bit, 5 skeins. So unfortunately, I did not decrease the overall skein amount, but I did decrease it by 88 grams. So it's not a fantastic month. Well, I will say working with crochet thread, you can make a lot of tiny projects, but it doesn't use up that much weight. The greatest amount of yarn used was in the pumpkins with the chunky weight yarn, but that's just how it goes. So the total of skeins still remains 265, but I did end up using about 88 grams overall. So that's the end for this video. I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed this series and want to see more, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Comment down below if you have any pattern ideas that I might potentially be interested. So, yep, see you in the next video.